Treat it like a bye week, Buckeye fans. That's what Pat Murphy at Bucknuts is doing. We talk Ohio State football with Pat each and every week here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. Please like, comment, share the videos on social media, and of course, subscribe right here. Pat, how you doing this afternoon?
I'm good. It's been a weird last couple days, but I think we've got things sorted out now and ready to move through this weekend and get ready for hopefully another game next Saturday.
No Maryland, Ohio State. It was going to be an intriguing matchup that we didn't necessarily anticipate having this type of build up to it just a few weeks ago based on the Terps play just over the past couple games. Before we get to what could have happened or might have happened this weekend, this was a Maryland issue, not an Ohio State issue, correct? Completely just in regards to the Terps positive tests and contact tracing, nothing to do with Ohio State.
Yeah, from my understanding, Maryland has had 8 positive tests in the last 7 days, going back to yesterday. So 7 days prior to what is today? Today's Thursday, so Wednesday. And the Big Ten rule is if the percentage jumps above 5% of the roster, the team, so that includes some people, non-players and things like that, you have to shut it down for a week. So that's what's happening here. Maryland's, those 8 players in that 7-day span took above that 5% threshold, and so according to Big Ten rules, they are not able to play this week. It's similar in some ways to what we saw with Wisconsin earlier in the season. Wisconsin elected to shut it down on its own. It wasn't necessarily the Big Ten percentages at that point, but they certainly went well above that eventually. But yeah, it's something that was going to be inevitable. When the Big Ten announced its rules, you were going to see, almost inevitably going to see this happen. And we've seen across the country, in other conferences that have different rules, teams having to shut down for weeks or whatnot. So the big difference in the Big Ten is there's no room to make these games up. And so this game won't be played. Ohio State and Maryland won't play in 2020. It'll be not till hopefully next year when they take the field together again. So that is the difference. And now the Buckeyes just move on from here. They were going to have 8 regular season games. Now they hope to have 7 plus, a Big Ten championship game if everything falls right.
So as Pat mentions, the game can't be made up. The Big Ten schedule is stacked through the championship game weekend. So now it sets up as Indiana, Illinois, Michigan State, and Michigan prior to the Big Ten championship weekend, in which everyone, as long as there are no positive COVID tests, will be in play that weekend, and the games will be determined on seeding. Well, so Pat Murphy's a writer for Bucknuts, and I used to be more in that type routine as a TV guy in having the big build up to that weekend's games and knowing what your assignments are, coming up with your own ideas and having that give and take with an editor, management, and trying to build the platform for that week's storylines and so forth. So that all just came crashing down. So there were obviously narratives looking you right in the face that you were working on, trying to build some storylines concerning Maryland's 2-game win streak and what kind of challenges they could present for the Buckeyes. And so at that point you were working on things, and then they all came to a crashing halt.
Yeah, it was a very unique situation. Obviously in college sports, in any sport, you don't want to see games canceled, but I hadn't been through anything like this previously. And interestingly enough, with it being the start of the early signing period for college basketball on Wednesday, we were on a Zoom call with Ohio State men's basketball coach Chris Holton when the news came out. So while on the Zoom call, I have Twitter on the side, and I see the tweet from the Maryland, I think it was the Maryland football department, the Maryland athletics, and it was like, oh, this this changes things. And actually, Chris Holtman got asked about, someone told him, hey, this happened, and they wanted his thoughts. And he said, I'm surprised as many of you stayed on this call as long as you have. I would have probably jumped off the call. So at least he was understanding. He gets where football stands. But yeah, as to your point, there were stories I had either, pretty much ready to go or in the offing that I will not use now. I was working on something on, the stuff from the Maryland press conference, which happened the day prior, including a story on Talia Tagovailoa, the quarterback for Maryland, Tua Tagovailoa's younger brother, who I think would have really challenged Ohio State's secondary. He's a talented player, can throw and run, has put up, since the first game where he threw 3 interceptions against Northwestern, has put up some good numbers. And, I was going to write about that, had some quotes from him too about his affinity for Justin Fields, obviously Ohio State's quarterback, and he watches him and really appreciates his game and things like that. So there were a number of stories that, would have been done that now we've kind of had to shift our focus and, move on to other things. Obviously there was the whole explaining what was happening with Ohio State and how this affects things. And that was kind of the shift for yesterday. And today's been more of okay, well, what stories do we still have that are left? Stories that weren't Maryland centric. And then, moving on to Indiana here over the weekend. And, that'll be an interesting game, which we can talk about more next week. But yeah, that's kind of how that process all happened. And we're still kind of at Bucknuts, still kind of figuring out exactly what to do. We will have some more basketball stuff than we probably would have normally this weekend, just because we did have that opportunity and now there's a window. But yeah, it was a unique experience, like I said earlier.
All you have to do is look at the Big Ten Eastern Division standings and the results through the first couple of games to see that Michigan and Penn State have been displaced by Indiana and Maryland in regards to what is possible. Not saying that those teams are going to challenge Ohio State on the field, but they have that opportunity based on winning the games leading into this. And I'm somewhat intrigued by Maryland because of some of the possibilities that you raised. And just this has been a doormat in the conference pretty much since they joined. They especially had a bad year last year. They lost 8 Big Ten games. They beat Rutgers. Okay, everybody's beating Rutgers, and they did as well by a zillion points. But other than that, they lost 8 Big Ten games by almost 40 points per game. And then they come into this season, they go to Northwestern. When does Northwestern ever beat anybody in the Big Ten by 40 points? I had to go back to 1970 to find such a game, and it's 43-3. So parlay that experience from last year into a beatdown of that proportion there, and then you're down 17 against Minnesota in the fourth quarter, a team that we thought was going to be good. And I got to give all sorts of credit to the resolve of that team, having been beaten down like that for the last year and a half, to come back from 17 down against a pretty good Minnesota team and win that game, and then go up to Penn State. And the numbers there are 59-0 last year and 136-3 the last 3 years, and beat Penn State. So they were a hot bunch.
Absolutely. And like I said before, I think this is a team that would have given Ohio State some challenges. I mean, it was still, the odds makers had it as a 4-touchdown game in favor of the Buckeyes, obviously, but I think it probably would have been closer than that. I think that, we've seen some issues with this Ohio State secondary. And I mentioned Tagovailoa earlier, but Dante Demas and Raheem Jarrett, two very good receivers that I think would have asked some questions of Shaun Wade, who, despite being a preseason All-American, has struggled a little bit at times in coverage. We talked to him this week, and he talked just about the adjustment from playing in the slot, where you do use a certain set of skills, and you're close to the quarterback and in the box. Whereas when you're out on the outside and you're a bit more isolated, the ball travels further to get there and those type of things. I think these receivers would have given him and Sevyn Banks and some of these other young corners, at least some issues. I still think Ohio State probably wins the game. So that would have been interesting. Maryland's defense, which has not been great, played a lot better against Penn State last week. And I think that it's moving in the right direction. As you mentioned, they were down big to Minnesota, but to come back, you need your defense to step up and stop the other team, as well as your offense to score points. And I think they did that in that game. So while I think Ohio State probably would have been able to do what it wanted in the passing game, as we've basically seen all season with Justin Fields leading the way, I do think that it would have been interesting to see, also Ohio State's trying to get this rushing attack going, over 200 yards in every game, but neither Trey Sermon or Master Teague has really stepped up as a top-level running back at this point. We talked about that last week. So, some interesting things that could have come out of this game. Obviously, the biggest thing, though, is it's another data point that Ohio State would have had on the schedule for the college football playoff down the road. Now they don't have that. I still think that the 7 regular season games and a potential Big Ten championship is enough, but you just never know what else happens down the road. Right now the rules are to play in the Big Ten championship game, you need to have played 6 games. Now that could change if there's a drastic number of games canceled, but Ohio State's down 1 already. We've seen Wisconsin; they're down 2. So, we're starting to see this, and obviously with cases rising across the country and the weather getting colder and things like that, who knows what happens. So it's unfortunate, especially because Ohio State has done such a good job of steering clear of this virus up to this point, with the precautions they've taken, to see it happen. And this isn't necessarily blaming Maryland. Who knows how the virus got in to their team, and hope you'd like to think that they are handling it as well as anyone. But it's an unfortunate circumstance for everyone involved, and certainly changes the dynamic a little bit for Ohio State now going forward.
Yeah, the Buckeyes definitely need to get on the field, and they may also need, like a Wisconsin, to get back on the field, which they are scheduled to do against Michigan, and then Wisconsin to step up and be that team that they've been in the past in the Big Ten Western Division, to provide another impressive, or one of the few impressive, opponents on the schedule in the Big Ten championship game. Got Pat Murphy on the line from Bucknuts 247 Sports. Join him and the rest of the staff there. Like this video, comment down below your thoughts about Ohio State football, and of course share the videos on social media, and hit that bell for the notification once you subscribe. That way you know when we're going live on a regular basis. Pat, I had heard a statistic just in the last few weeks that Ohio State owned 14 of the 25 stars in the Big Ten. That's no big surprise. You mentioned Maryland's weapons. Raheem Jarrett, a freshman, would be one of those 5 stars that got away from the Buckeyes that is on another roster, and he's off to a good start. And that would have been an interesting matchup, as you mentioned, to see. So going back to the Rutgers game, I'm trying to frame this. You can go 2 different routes. 27 points against Rutgers given up is not a good look. And then just the nature of the points and how they were scored, big plays. At the same time, this game was 35-3. It was 42-9. So there was not a Rutgers touchdown that was scored that could not be considered garbage time. The Buckeyes had a big lead. So whether you take the concerned approach or the, hey, it didn't really matter approach,
I think you can be, and I am, somewhere in the middle and leaning more towards the it didn't matter. But I do think there are things that are potentially worrisome for Ohio State in this game. First, you mentioned 35-3 at halftime. Ohio State obviously went into the locker room feeling very good about where the team was, and it's natural for players to take their foot off the gas a little bit. And I think given how they've beaten Rutgers in recent years, I did the math last week, and it was 49.5 points was the average margin of victory going back to the first meeting in 2014. I think that, compiled with being up so big, leads to the mental letdown that you saw. And, even into the third quarter, it was still a pretty big blowout at that point in time. Now, credit to Rutgers. They did not give up. And this is a Greg Schiano team that is embodying their coach a little bit. He's a hard-nosed, fight kind of guy, but they threw a lot of trick plays at Ohio State. I mean, from the opening kickoff, but really in that second half with, one of their touchdowns was a throw to a eligible tackle that Ohio State just, didn't cover because they weren't, I'm sure they were aware he was eligible, but weren't expecting that, a rollout to one side, and just threw it back, and he walked into the end zone. So, those are little things that I think you need to be aware of now going forward. But in terms of just, down the line and winning these games, I'm not sure that you're going to see too many of those. They also scored on a punt return where they had a lateral. And if you watch Rutgers the week before, they had a series of laterals they returned a touchdown that ended up coming back to a penalty, I believe. But, this is a team that's not afraid to try some trick plays. I think they had 8 coming into the game. Ohio State was aware of that. You just never know how they're going to come. One of their big explosive plays was a snap that the quarterback faked like it went over his head, and the running back took it for 66 yards. So from that standpoint, the trick plays I don't think you're too worried about. What you are worried about are things like tight end catching a touchdown over Shaun Wade in the end zone. He's again supposed to be your All-American cornerback. You don't want to see that. You want to see the better tackling from especially members of your secondary. Now, there were a handful of second-string guys that Ohio State worked in a little bit more in the second half, especially on defense. But, the tackling's got to be better. That's an issue that really plagued Ohio State 2 years ago. So things like that, I think, are things you look at and need to get cleaned up regardless of the opponent. But, I think when you look at the final score and you think it's, probably closer than you expected the Ohio State-Rutgers game to be, I don't know if that's indicative of really how the game went.
Okay, I was just going to look up Indiana's next. Yeah, so Indiana's got Michigan State. Okay. So next up for the Buckeyes is not Maryland. It's Indiana. The Hoosiers have Michigan State coming up this Saturday. Pat Murphy, Bucknuts 247 Sports, helping us break down Ohio State football each and every week. Pat, we appreciate you stopping by. Know that you'll still need to work, but you can enjoy some other college football, I guess, this weekend.
Yeah, I certainly will enjoy this unforeseen bye week.